Well, hello and welcome to Unprompted. I'm here today with none other than Lauren Goerz, who is at Rasa now, but it's been a long journey to get there. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and then we'll hop into a nice conversation about conversational AI at the enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it. I've been in the conversational AI space for a couple of years, almost a decade now. And I think maybe what's interesting about my background up until now is I've gone from implementation to product. So for a long time, I worked side by side with conversational AI teams in a bunch of different roles. Been an analyst, been a bot builder, tester, designer, PM, loads of different, let's say, job roles within the conversational AI team. And then at a certain point, I actually switched into the product direction. And that's where I am today. Today, I work at Rasa. I'm a technical marketing engineer, which I think in some ways is a little bit of a mix between a product evangelist and kind of a product marketer. So I do a lot of work with product teams to try and help our product team get insights from the broader market. And of course, also help our customers learn how to use our product. So that's where I am today, doing a lot of learning enablement. And that's kind of my goal, is to help spread the word about Rasa and what we're working on.
That's really cool. So you've had all these different roles, and now you're helping build the product that you wish existed and that you understand so well from all those different angles. And then I guess you've got like this very unique, broad perspective on these things. So what is something that you feel is true about conversational AI that just very few people understand, that you say day in, day out? For you, it's a given, but people somehow don't get it.
I think one of the things that I've noticed recently, especially in the last 2 years or so, is there tends to be a lot of folks that tend to think there's only one way to build a conversational interface. And I think from my perspective, one of the things that I keep trying to bring across to everyone that I talk with about conversational AI is that there's actually loads of different ways to build conversational interfaces, especially today, now more than ever. And I think that's the exciting bit is, rather than maybe thinking about, hey, why this way is better than that way, thinking about how individual conversational AI teams can use all of the different tools together in different ways for their specific use case. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily a groundbreaking novel idea, but nonetheless, it's more of a mindset I'm noticing around in the market that I wish we could change a little bit and think about how we can use different tools to make conversational interfaces better.
Yes, it's almost like the difference between when people talk about it, you're talking about an interface, or you're trying to solve a problem for a customer through an interface, but somehow people talk about the technologies, but actually there's different technologies that you can plug into that interface to make it happen. And there is confusion about that, I guess.
Yeah, the end result is much more important than the type of technology you use behind it. And of course, I mean, maybe that's contradictory coming from someone that works in product, but nonetheless, I still think it's an important thing to get across that there are lots of different ways you can make things talk.
Yeah, and okay, so then if you look at like you've seen it through different life cycles, different stages, different perspectives, like what technically, organizationally, what are some foundational things that just need to be there to build something well, and to build something well means to continuously improve it. So what are some of the things that are just a given that just need to be there technically, organizationally, whatever comes to mind?
Maybe I'll start high level. So organizationally, some of the things that I've seen, again, this isn't rocket science, but I think it's one of the things that a lot of teams miss is alignment with the folks that hold the wallet in conversational AI projects. So the people that are giving the budget. And I think that's something I've seen in a lot of teams, is that the person who holds the budget for conversational AI projects are often not deeply involved in the project. That's not always the case. Sometimes they are deeply involved, but oftentimes they're not. And I've seen a lot of really good teams have their budget removed or kind of get closed out, even though they're delivering excellent results, serving, thousands of customers, simply because there wasn't enough communication back up the ladder saying, hey, we're doing good things here. We need even more money to do more good things. And so I think that goes back into this like organizational, and probably one of the topics we'll talk about today that I'm very passionate about is, setting yourself up to prove value back to the organization within the conversational AI project. And so I think that's something I feel really passionate about from like a organizational perspective. Technologically, I think for me, as like if I were to go back into a PM role today, I would really want to make sure that I had a good understanding of my options. So to go back to that original point about being able to use different tools for different use cases, there's now a whole array of different tools you can use to deliver conversational experiences, and knowing about each of them is going to be important so that you can make the right decision about what's right for your use case. So that was high level broad, but I think that's where I would start. It's like, make sure that the people who you're in good communication with the people that own your budget and showing them how much value you bring, even more than you think you need to. And then on the other side, make sure you actually have a really good understanding of all your options, because I think, there's lots of different things that teams aren't looking at because they just don't simply know that they're there, or they feel intimidating or otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So we call it conversational culture that needs to be developed internally in organizations. Like, people need to know, it's like, what is a conversational interface? How is it helping? How is it proving value? And then a big part of that, and I think that's where these two things that you're describing connect, is that once the people in the boards and the people holding the wallets understand what you're doing and what conversational AI is, they will create more time for you to start exploring different options. But very often it's just a race to the bottom, and we want to reduce cost and save money. So we don't even have time to really think through strategies and thinking about different solutions and different approaches. So you kind of need to have that broader conversational culture in the organization to also create space for some of those things of technically of how do you want to approach that and think stuff through better. So that's really cool. A conversational review as a discipline, it's like something that you talk about a lot, conversational review. So new to this practice, what's the difference between conversation analysis and sort of this results improvement oriented process? Like, talk me through that.
Yeah, so I think there is a study and understanding of human communication, which today, as I understand it, at least, is known by conversation analysis. So it's kind of the sociolinguistic study of looking at how people interact in conversation, the structure, rules, and social function of language and real-time interaction.
Yeah.
I think this is kind of has a lot of academic basis and is also super useful for industry. I think a lot of
Elizabeth Stoker comes to mind then immediately.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
She spoke at Beyond Boundaries, and I loved the topic was, I think, asking for things is harder than it seems, which I think was a really good example of how the study of conversational analysis can be used in conversational AI to kind of reduce the cognitive load it takes for people to ask questions to an AI assistant. And I think that was really insightful, and it was so interesting also to see how she had broken down language into these different pairs, and there were different names for each different part of the sentence. And I would say that's not the space that I'm super familiar with. I kind of wish I knew about. I think I would have loved to study that had I had a chance to redo that phase of my life. Nonetheless, I think probably the space of conversational analysis, maybe this is like a sub umbrella of it, like the super, let's say, I don't want to say the other one is not practical, but very practical, results-driven conversation review is kind of the name that I gave, for better or worse, to some of the work that I did as an analyst on a conversational AI project. But I'd be curious from your side, is there, rather than the study of conversation, let's say the study of logs in a conversational AI project, is that something that you have a name for, or you've worked with other people that have had a name for? Because I think it is different.
I don't know if reviewing, it's more like a verb. It's like, oh, we're reviewing conversations, like an AI trainer doing part of it is a review. And I think at CDI, we try to focus more is like understanding the customer's behavior and their emotional state before they even start speaking. Because a lot of times you might, that's the thing, if you build a bad bot, just like throwing data at it and then try to go over those conversations and iterate on those conversations, you are improving, but your baseline was so low. So it helps to even go one step back and be like, all right, so this is a customer. What is it that they're trying to do here? And then, okay, this is our assistant helping them do that. And then you can look at those conversations. But sometimes if you just only go at that review side of things, you're also missing out on some easy value, I would say. But yeah, basically kind of back to the question. Yeah, conversation review, looking at the data, but it's not really a word that comes to mind, I guess.
I also feel like it's an activity that so many conversational AI teams do, but it's not really codified, or there's not a framework necessarily that every team across the board is using. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be that case. But I think it's something that easily slips through the gaps in terms of areas of focus, which hurts my soul a little bit inside, because I think it's so important to review what customers are telling you in their own words, exactly what they want. And if you're not reading it and listening to it, you're missing a huge opportunity there.
Yeah. Well, there's more mature teams, particularly if they have a very mature contact center operation, they'll have people reviewing the live conversations as well, right? And there's very rigid processes for that. And those people are very calibrated to make sure that everybody's speaking the same thing. And so some teams do have very strong discipline around reviewing these conversations. but then it's often very process or focused and not necessarily like what is the customer experience that we want, kind of the stuff that I talked about earlier. So we still need to build that bridge a little bit in getting so the processes exist, but and then there's different frameworks, but they don't always meet where they should.
Yeah, totally.
So
Yeah.
talk, you've outlined different types of conversation reviews, like a targeted, discovery, quality review. Like, talk us through these different approaches that you see and how they differ, and I guess how teams maybe then decide if what they should be applying at which point.
So maybe baseline, I think for me, all this maybe goes a little bit back into that kind of team setup or like setting up your project question that you had earlier. All good conversation reviews, at least in conversational AI, in my opinion, stems from really good logs. So having access to conversations is step one. And I think that's something that is interesting with conversational AI, especially when you have something that's trackable or you're able to embed metadata in different parts of the conversations. You can set yourself up for really easy review over the long term. If you have a log and are able to embed metadata or kind of trackers at different points in the conversation, so you know where, the flow of conversation, where it's going in from customer to customer. Looking, imagining you have that, then I tended when I was working as an analyst to do exactly those three types of review. Targeted review for me always starts with a question. So it comes often from a PM or project leadership. And these questions are broad. They could be something like, why is the solution ratio for this specific leave time off topic not performing well? And hey, Lauren, go figure it out. And then you have to do conversation review to figure these things out. It could be, why do Android users have slightly higher CSAT than Apple users? You might have to figure that out, look through the app and, go deeper within the interface itself than just the conversation. How is our ASR performing and where can we improve? Things like this. And so that's why I think the analyst position is a really interesting one, because you have to have really good knowledge of the system at large and be able to dive into the data and find out improvement opportunities. And I think that's kind of the role of the analyst, is to find these and surface them so that management or product managers, et cetera, can make better decisions. So that's targeted analysis for me.
And so starting with a question coming from somewhere, so I guess there's a backlog of questions. Somebody will have to prioritize that, and then you go in. And I guess maybe some of those questions can be bundled and be like, oh, there seems to be something there. And then you, as an investigator, go hunt for the solutions, which I guess is now much easier with LLMs as well as a search function through this data.
True. I think the clustering opportunities there are really powerful. And also, I think I'm not always personally the hugest fan of using, let's say, emotion detection within the chat itself to make decisions. But I think as a tool for reviewing, could be super interesting to cluster based on the type of sentiment that people might have. But again, up to you whether you want to use that tool necessarily or not. But yeah, I think clustering opportunities. Moreover, I think good metadata can be really powerful. If you can actually embed and say, okay, this many people went down this topic, and someone asked me, hey, Lauren, why is the solution ratio for this specific topic gone down? I can drill into every conversation that touched that specific part of, whether it be a flow or a topic, things like that. That's, I think, really useful.
Yeah. And one of the things that early on we discovered is like that just one of the valuable things about having proper design is that you've made conscious decisions, because sometimes you might do this whole hunt and you feel like, oh, people going down this path, they're unhappy, but there's no reasoning of why that path was created in the first. It just ended up being that way. Whereas actually, if you have a practice of intentful design, you're like, oh, we created this with the intention or thinking that this and this, and therefore there's a thesis as to why it exists in the first place. And then if it doesn't work, like, you can build on that. But if that's just kind of randomly thrown in there, then it's like, yeah, it doesn't work. These people aren't happy. It's like, oh yeah, because the path doesn't make sense. Why was it built in the first place? And then nobody knows that answer. So that's where also I think intention around design and that practice really helps the analysis here to solve those questions. So that's targeted reviews. We've got discovery reviews.
Yeah. So this is something, of course, I would have loved to do, had more time to do this in my capacity there. Typically, targeted review for me took up the most amount of my time, right? Because it's burning questions from management in the capacity of an analyst. However, discovery review, I think, is equally important in the sense that you need time to, instead of just going in search of a problem, find out where the problems actually are by reading through the logs organically. Meaning, for me, that you typically looked like taking a random selection of conversations, let's say yesterday between 3 and 4 p.m., and just give it a read. Have a look through about what's actually happening in real time. And there you can find also a lot of really interesting improvement opportunities. And I think that's where you can get a lot of low-hanging fruit or quick wins simply by discovering, oh, actually, if we shortened up the number of turns in this flow, we'd be a lot more successful. Everyone's getting stuck here. Things like this could be, I think, exposed from that kind of organic search for improvement opportunities.
And then, so if you look at, discovery, targeted, there's a whole bunch of people in this project. What does just the whole, good, strong QA process look like then? And how involved should product owners be? Because it seems, I think your passion on this project suggests very much that the value is so much after launch and improving, and there's so much going on. And a lot of times we ship, we deploy, and then we kind of hand off this QA process to some junior in the corner. At least that's what we see sometimes as well. So what would you, if you could design this from scratch, what does the whole QA process look like?
We'll caveat this and say I'm not a QA engineer, so I can give you some feedback and say I think you should definitely have a full-time tester on your team. This is a role I've supported but not, let's say, occupied myself. Nonetheless, I think maybe the gap that I sometimes see is you get a lot of teams that will build a lot of test cases, something called a regression test. Make sure that new things that you build didn't break the things that exist in the system today. Super important. Should definitely do that. Definitely should do that. However, I think there's also, let's say, the human in the loop analysis that sometimes gets left out because it's simply more time consuming. And so for me, that looked like in practice, anytime probably more in the intent world, you would have a user come in and annotate, hey, how well did the system actually, how flow, which intent, which whatever should be activated. And the human would come in and analyze it. And we'd get a ratio side by side, human annotation versus system annotation. And I think that's really useful because it gives you, a kind of a actual ground truth, a grounding point of understanding how well your system's performing, not just based on questions that you made up, but based on actual user questions. I'm not sure. Did I explain that in clearly?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess that's the main thing is you're never done in a way, right? And it's an ongoing thing, and you need people and systems, and the more the systems do, the more people need to be there to check them almost in a way as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the tension almost that there is between doing things quickly because we can, because it's much easier these days and our competitors are doing, and caring about our customers and trying to do things well. There's this tension. How do you guys at Rasa deal with this, and what's your strategy there?
I think that really fair question. That's probably, I imagine it's not just Rasa, but I imagine every product team in the conversational AI space today, that's probably one of their biggest points of stress because there's huge pressure to deliver things that make excellent demos, which is good, right? We want to be able to show value quickly to our customers. However, on the flip side, all things that demo well don't always work at scale in production in a let's say reusable way. And I think, of course, we'd love to close that gap, right? And say the things that we, provide in quick, cool demos also are super scalable. But that's where the hard work comes in. And I think at Rasa, we most importantly want to be able to deliver things that work to our customers at scale in production. As a brand, we tend to serve really large, let's say, often customers that are in regulated industries as well that have high volumes of conversations. So for us, scale, reproducibility, transparency, all of these things have to be on point. So for us, we have to, by nature of our customer, really slant in the direction of building things that are going to work long-term and scale well. However, that's sometimes at the cost of really cool marketing demos. And so I think that's something we need to find a good balance of from a product team, or, I'm speaking on behalf of all my product colleagues here. Not really. They might have their own opinions, of course, about this as well, but that's the hard balance that we're on today. And I hope that in time, and I think we saw this also when I look at kind of let's call it the first wave conversational AI teams, they also grew in knowledge, grew in understanding over time. And sometimes it's just a matter of time until people try things, figure out what actually works, what doesn't, and then come to a center point at some point.
Yeah, and I guess with your customers, they are also so used to disappointing flashy demos that they don't care for that. They're not that easily persuaded by it anyway. So they're still what's really happening here, I guess. So that's helpful for where you play. And in a recent blog post, the process calling, somebody told me what's the whole process calling thing at Rasa, and that seems to be an important thing. What problem does that try to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think process calling is one way at looking at our approach to how a dialogue system can work. So I think when I look at the market broadly of conversational AI, and I'm oversimplifying this, you can go and talk about this for hours, but I look at on one side, you have agentic frameworks. So things that are as agentic as it gets, meaning allowing the LLM to understand the user and then also decide the next, the thing to do next. Using an LLM call at every, looping through different opportunities, calling tools, things like that. That's super agentic, if we even want to use that word. I don't dare to define it. And on the other side, you have, let's say, traditional conversational AI. Traditional sounds negative. It shouldn't be. There's lots of great things about
proven.
Proven. That's a good word. Proven. Talk, on the proven intent side of things. There are also loads of techniques that can still be used today that are super cheap, low latency, very useful, right? But nonetheless are not necessarily allowing an LLM to come in and either understand the user or decide the next best step. And then I think for Rasa, we tried to use the word, and kudos to Alan here, one of our co-founders here at Rasa, who I think decided, okay, we've got tool calling over here. We've got some, traditional conversational AI practices happening over here. What is Rasa doing? Well, at the end of the day, we're letting the LLM come in and understand what the user is saying. So you can use an LLM for better or for worse. You could compare it to intent recognition if that's what you're used to, but it's understanding what the user wants to accomplish and then suggesting some next best processes to select. So instead of allowing the LLM to go and pick whatever tools it wants, it can only pick a process that's been effectively predefined by the user. So the thesis is ultimately rather build a few processes in advance, build them out since you know them, and then use the LLM to route to these different processes. So process calling. Did I, with all of my hand gestures here, make that somewhat clearer? Any follow-up questions there to kind of...
Yeah, no, but it makes a lot of sense. It's like it seems like you're trying to make use of what an LLM is good at, understanding what people say, but then keeping control of what happens after. And it's almost like any offline process is how it works too. It's like you can go into a store, but there's still certain aisles you can go down and it's organized and you can follow a path. And if it's probably something that people are more familiar with, so there's no need to give an LLM all that freedom, that agency to start figure stuff out if it's already figured out and there's few options available that are just created well and you have full control. I guess that's in particular with your type of customers, like there's no need to take on any risk. And if you're dealing with millions of customers, like you can't be right most of the time. You basically need to be in control every time because every 0.1% is an absolute number, still a lot of customers. So why take on any of that risk? I guess that's kind of the philosophy behind it then, right?
Yeah, I think it's a exactly. I think you said it perfectly. It's using the LLM for things that it's really good at, understanding users in context, but then not necessarily using an LLM to decide what to do next or your business logic that you as a business inherently know and have already defined. Of course, it takes a little bit of extra upfront work, right, to outline these different flows, classic bot building skills that we've used over and over. But I think that's also useful for teams that have these skills already, rather than outsourcing it to a team of developers that doesn't know your customers or hasn't been working with this topic for a long time. You can keep the same team that you have, but use LLMs in a nuanced way. So I think that's useful. It's cheaper. Also, you don't have to call an LLM at every single step. You just use it when you need to understand a user. And with Rasa, you can still use intents too if you like. Doesn't make sense to use an LLM to figure out if some user's saying hello, in my opinion, at least.
You never know. You never know. And
how nuanced it is. Yeah.
And that same blog post also talks about the need for state. Like, you talk a little bit about that. I had it in title. It's another word, sort of phrase that dances around Rasa.
True, being stateful or stateless. I guess at the end of the day, the important thing is need for state, meaning the need to be able to continue with existing processes, to have context from previous. And I think when, if you look into how some agentic frameworks are formatted, it sometimes can be challenging to keep the state all the time because you have to run lots of different tools, loops, things like that. But having a more stateful approach can be more consistent, cheaper, easier to build and use for your existing team. So I think that's something to consider for teams. But again, it's one of many different ways to build a dialogue system. And I think that's, every team has to decide, hey, is this for me? And I think with Rasa, we've got an interesting kick because you can use LLMs more freely if you like. You can really dial it up, or you can also dial it down and say, hey, for most of my things, I still want to use intents, but use the LLM where I feel comfortable.
Yeah. And about those, having those processes set up, there's companies out there that maybe they were building a bot, they didn't get the results they had. And part of it was kind of also those processes weren't done properly, right? So they might now think, we use an LLM to camouflage basically what we have. But I guess so is it, should they just focus on that core thing of setting up those processes first before moving into this world, or does it accelerate, or does it get in the way? Like, can you talk a little bit about that tension?
Yeah, I think every conversational AI project I've ever been in, and that's already a few at this point, has always had this conundrum of, we have a really great innovative team that's ready to develop things, and then they start building and they realize, oh wait, this is a super complicated process we have to build around. Or the process isn't defined and they have to talk to 4 different subject matter experts to figure out how said process works. And so I think there can be a really nice alignment actually sometimes of building conversational AI and also process optimization in the same fold, because as you build conversational AI, you realize how complex or poorly designed a process can be for an end user, and optimizing that with the team that you're working with. And I think that's always a great way to work. Bring the conversational AI team with the subject matter expert together and think about ways you can improve it. Of course, you're probably gonna have to build the complex process first, but over a long period of time, I think can also lead to process optimization, of course, as well.
And when you come in with new customers, do you often find yourself reducing the scope of what they've currently built? Or because we find it a lot, it's like they have a boss like, oh, we got all these things, and it's like, yeah, we either just trim it down and start there, or we gotta fix all of it. Like, what do you usually see?
Ooh, good question. That one is unfortunately for me an "it depends" question. I do not give you a clear answer there, but I think because this is also, you're always playing with the scales of what's important to the person that's running this project. Is breadth more important than depth? Usually depth is more important. I would make the same case. Depth is the most important. Run a process top to bottom before you try and expand it. And I think we're seeing this conundrum being expressed as well in teams that are trying to replace full process automation with RAG assistance as well. So you have, previously a conversational AI team that went about automating in chat full processes that are being suddenly replaced with kind of, for me, what feels like a regression to a much simpler way of, Q&A solving problems. Instead of actually solving the problem, let me give you a 10-step, 40-line paragraph about how you can go about and solve that problem for yourself. Sure, easier to deliver, but is it a great user experience? More like chatty.
Yeah, I always find out particularly teams I've been doing for a while, the tension of like, is it legacy or is it actually wisdom? Of like, we're doing things this way. It's like, why? Well, we've been doing it for a long time. As an outsider, in this new industry with LLMs, you might think, oh, that's just old school way of doing things. We'll replace that. And sometimes that's possible. And sometimes it's actually, no, it's really complex, and this is the wisdom that we have. Can't simplify this stuff. I guess that's what a lot of brands are now discovering, like innovative teams. So like, just replace it. It's fine. Just throw an LLM at it. Just build a RAG. We don't need any of that. And it's like, no, it turns out we did. But yeah, it probably changes, like you said, per organization and per team, what should not be happening. So now if you talk about, designing for evaluation, not just deploying, if you talked about metadata before a little bit, like the importance of it. So what are the top 3 pieces of metadata that you would say every team needs to log to support this whole review, evaluation, and iteration process?
Yeah, if I had to choose my top 3, I'll say the top 3, then I'll tell you why for each one. It would probably be topic. I'll tell you what that means. It would be channel. And then let me think of one more, maybe because I love reading bad conversations, CSAT, or some kind of customer review. But when you get like honest, real feedback from customers, or like a star rating, NPS, I wouldn't go into which one is better or why, but nonetheless, whatever your type of customer evaluation mechanism is, which tends to be also, I would say, for many organizations, kind of one of their North Star metrics that they're tracking across the whole experience. Those would be my top 3. So topic being my first one. I think a lot of teams previously like to do this by intent. I'm going to make a case that, especially with Rasa, we're making the case you don't necessarily always need intents. You can go, break free from intents in different ways. Nonetheless, I think what's much more important than how a user utterance has been tagged with an intent is actually the topic or the flow that they end up arriving in. That being because lots of users say lots of things. Sometimes they can be testing the assistant for its ability, asking chit-chat questions. Do we all live in a yellow submarine? Those are not super important to me as a reviewer, right? It's kind of, of course I want to, I'll put it this way. if you're able to answer those, you get a lot of respect, street cred. It improves the experience later. But nonetheless, when I want to really focus on how a certain topic is performing, I want to know how many users got to that specific point in my conversation and really look at that deeply, because you can't control. There are lots of uncontrollables about what people might say, but I do want to look closely at the things that I actually have built for. And so I think that's useful to track.
Yeah, and someone might have an intent and express language that they think matches that intent, but the topic is very different. Because then you got to figure out what's actually happening here, and for you as a business, it's assigned to a very different topic. Because somebody they might be like, "Oh, my credit card's not working." For them, "Oh, the credit card needs to get fixed." But maybe later it get like the actual conversation is about them not having
Really
money.
good example.
Like
Exactly.
so there's a very those things aren't really to say, and that's I guess why it's so important what you said earlier, to really go in and read what's happening in these conversations, because if you just throw data at all of this, like, you have no clue what's going on.
And I think exactly the reason why topic for me was so important is we would have, I thought this was a nice way to be organized. We'd have topic and subtopic for a lot of different projects. So let's say you'd have a whole domain of topics, let's say time off, vacation time off, parental leave, time off policy for different countries, right? And then we could drill down in my logs. I could say, okay, show me all the conversations with leave, time off, and vacation booking. And then I could really just look at that experience purely and see how it was running and evaluate what was working well, what wasn't working well. And that's why topic for me was so important, because it could cluster this experience and give me the tools I needed to show, business leaders why they should add scope, why they should change the flow. A lot of collaboration with designers as well. Like, have you seen this? People are dropping off at the third step every single time. You should know about it. What can we do to fix it? So I think that's why topic for me was always super important, because it could isolate key user journeys.
Yeah, and then number 2 was channels, I think, on your top 3.
So I think because so many it depends on how the conversational AI team is set up, but I've noticed that there tends to be clusters of people working on different channels within every conversational AI project. You have a text team, maybe it expands to voice, you add WhatsApp, you add, and there's different people and kind of product owners responsible for each of these channels. They tend to be super interested in their channel. Of course, they're generally interested in the broader team goals, but they're very interested in their channel. And so for me to serve them well, everything I did often had to be sorted by channel as well. And I think that's also important to look at, because every channel has different design affordances, has different needs. It's super important to be able to look at it at the channel level as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting, because our core philosophy is always like, if you design voice first, that's kind of like the bare bones of a conversation. And then if you would want to then create it in the app or on WhatsApp, you can just change and add buttons and follow sort of the design language of that specific channel or interface. So that was kind of like the way to be efficient. But I like what you're saying, like, the person that owns the WhatsApp channel is likely a very different person that owns the voice channel or just in-app channel. So to actually be able to talk to them in that way is a very nice insight. And now I'm blanking on number 3.
That was, I think, some kind of, like, if I could filter by another thing, I always like to filter by conversations by user review, effectively, because that's sometimes the only way I might ever get from the user a direct feedback about how they thought the conversation went. Love it when we gave them free text opportunities to tell us why we sucked. Those are the best, because then you get just really, people will say things to a bot that they would never say to a human. So I think that's also, you just get really direct, sometimes brutal feedback from your customers. And yeah, not everyone had a free text option, but I think having that option allows you to really kind of just cluster and be like, all right, if you're really looking for areas to improve, look at your 1 through 3 star reviews. There you have it.
Yeah. But it's always tricky, right? Because then it's like the people that leave the review are the ones that are already upset and they want to get some of their chest. And sometimes we overvalue those 2-3 reviews. We get 2-3 beautifully crafted, rich language reviews where we know they actually had a different problem, when it was actually their fault, versus thousands of people that made it to the end. So you still got to get good at ignoring certain people.
Absolutely. But I think this is where good metadata comes in as well, because I could look at, like, let's take a telecom example. If someone is leaving a raging review, because of let's say my internet line reset flow was not satisfactory for them, I could also check and be like, okay, what time did they ask me this question? I could check in my metadata. Oh, we had a big outage at exactly that time. really nothing more I can do in that scenario, unfortunately, for this customer. And of course, we'd love to be able to go back in and ideally, like, there are other tools you could use to make this experience better for them, following up, letting them know what happened, things like this that maybe weren't built in. But I think having that metadata to explain either via customer data, ideally redacted without, a GDPR problems, nonetheless, having that metadata on the side to paint the whole picture gives you a lot of value.
And you're talking a lot about, because the data you're looking at and then what you're communicating to the business, there's the system metrics and then there's the business metrics. Like there's like a translation that takes place there. What would be like a good metric strategy for people that want to prove their value internally?
I think I've seen a couple. The one North Star that seems to be used across different customers, sometimes called by different names, I see as solution ratio, which is, from the number of total conversations that you had, how many customers said that you were able to actually help them. So that's from the customer perspective. I've also seen the same ratio be used by saying, okay, from all of the customers that I had, how many customers got to the end of a user journey or a flow, right? So not from the customer perspective, from the business perspective. People do it differently. I think from the customer perspective is definitely perhaps it tends to be a lower number, but it tends to be maybe a more honest number about how you're actually doing because you're asking the customer to decide. And a lot of people just don't give you a rating at all, right? So you have to live with that as well. Happy people tendentially don't leave us, a CSAT rating. And these ratings as well, there's whole loads of research out there and literature about why you should or shouldn't use them or why you should use this one over this one. But it's still at least a baseline metric.
Yeah. I mean, if we simplify it from the business side, at the end of the day, everybody's just interested in some level of like, what's the automation rate? Like, are we automating processes? Are we doing a good job at that? Whether that's then first time resolution, average handling time in a contact center or completion rates, it's like all of that. And then there's customer experience, like, do they like it? Is it good? Does it add to our brand? Is it helping our brand or is it hurting our brand? And then ultimately about money, it's cost to serve. Like, are we reducing cost to serve? So what's the cost of an automated chat versus a live chat? It should be about 1/10, we think. And then as you start adding to scope, that's usually like what we see a lot is said, oh, we're doing a good job. Let's now do more of it. And they start building out all these use cases, but the customer experience doesn't increase at the same pace. So people start dropping out because they're just throwing more tech at it. So now it starts to hurt the experience because it's not nuanced enough. And then immediately when people drop out, your cost to serve goes up as well. Because now you've got all these engineers building stuff. It's collecting dust and then it's hurting all of them.
And you have the hidden cost. This was for me always frustrating. The hidden cost of deflection, of them just returning in another channel. And then you've just served. And I think that's something that a lot of, especially again, when I see the kind of the proliferation of RAG only assistance. Sure, you can answer a question, which is great. But at the end of the day, if you haven't solved the problem, you've gone through the additional API call of telling the person what they probably already knew, go call this number, and get service that way. So I think this hidden cost of deflection is something that a lot of people don't realize. It's more efficient to solve it in the chat itself versus telling them to go to other channels.
Yeah, it's going to show up somewhere. That's why you need to look at the total cost to serve. So for the whole, basically you want to look at like, how much are we spending on service and how much are we doing? And then you can look at what part is conversational AI doing in that. So if you just look at the cost of, it's the same of like when you look at the investment in conversational AI, you need to really think through all the people involved to really understand what your cost per automated chat is. Then you're going to see that actually the business case is not as easy as they usually think when they write it on the back of a napkin. And you need to connect that to the total cost to serve, because otherwise you still don't know what you're doing. And then you get into this point where it's complicated to calculate all of that. So this is now also very easy for me to say, but yeah, those things usually are there. Let's talk a little bit about, LLMs. We talked about it a bit, of course, quite a bit already, but they can push boundaries of what assistants can do. But how do you see structured conversation design and review practices as we talked about today? How do you see that evolve now with these LLMs?
Yep, I think with LLMs it depends of course on your approach, right? If you are using an LLM to help understand what the user is saying, I think it is interesting because you don't have this natural one-to-one kind of intent accuracy calculation, right? So I think that's something that was typically done by conversational AI teams. So Now you have to look at other ways of tracking success in terms of user understanding. I think all the same things that we've been tracking previously still apply. Like, we need to understand how well the system understands the user. We need to understand how well the user is able to get through user journeys. We need to understand how accurate our speech to text or ASR system is, or voice streaming system in the future. There's lots of different new technologies that come in, but at the end of the day, we still need to understand kind of the basics of, is it working well or not? That's not a very specific answer nonetheless, but I think, for every new technology, you're still trying to kind of solve the same problem. Is it accurate? Is it working well? But you just need a different measure of looking at it. And I think that means maybe I'm hoping in the future there are maybe more automated ways of, let's say, assessing and measuring things, clustering, as we talked about earlier, looking at sentiment, running things using LLMs not only as, let's say, tools to make the conversation better, but also as productivity tools. I think there are a lot of opportunities there that haven't been fully productized, I think, yet within conversational AI platforms.
Yeah, so we're going to see smarter approaches to all of that then. Yeah, because even now, because thinking about like these teams that are looking to blend, these scripted deterministic flows and these LLM-based flows now, they're also, so you're dealing with two different technologies. Certain use cases you might use this and then you do that, and that needs to sort of be in harmony with each other and work. So you've got LLMs, you got declarative, then you've got live agents even. So you got all three, but you need to orchestrate that, but they all come with different metrics that also need to be unified in a way as well, right? So you have that second layer of problems that also gets more complex once you start doing both. So what do you like in general, maybe not around the data, but in general, those teams blending those two approaches, what's the main piece of advice that you would have for that? Because it's like, it makes sense, but it's also another layer of complexity.
Totally. I think for a lot of this begins again with like the foundation of the team is like it's kind of boring, but true, like the data architecture of how you set up your topics and your, planning your assistant and how it's going to grow, organizing it by domain. And, the same things that like content managers are really good at doing, I think also has to be applied to the build layer of AI assistants. So when you organize things, I mean, I'm using Rasa as an example because it's of course the system I'm most familiar with, right? You can have flows that are all, you can have leave time off booking, leave time off parental leave time off something else, you know what I mean? Organizing it in this kind of way makes these kind of processes almost atomic in a sense, so that you can always see how different ones are performing. And then maybe on the side, you want to have a slightly more exploratory flow. Appointment booking, for example, is a one that's challenging, I think, for deterministic flows to handle in that sense. You can still measure that a user got into that flow, but once it's in there, you have a more agentic experience happening behind the scenes. So I think it's all, if you can find a way to use metadata to find out where the user has traveled or reached, it makes it much easier to isolate and analyze these different user experiences across the board and kind of decide, at the end of all of them, we're also going to still give the user a question, probably, how did you like this experience? And that can be, let's say, a unifying metric in some way.
I like how you said that. I think we talk a lot about is like, who are the customers? What do they want? And then I think a step that a lot of people forget is like, what is the desired behavior? So if you say, I have the journey of scheduling an appointment, which is great for so the desired behavior is for this customer to make it there. That's at that point in that piece of thing that you create, like this is the customer, this is what they want, this is our goal, and clearly defining that. It's often something that happens. It's like, oh, we just follow the data and then we make assumption about it, but actually just clearly defining something. It's like, we want this customer to do this, or we don't want this customer to call, or these types of customers want to do X, Y, Z. So the thinking like really about people and the desired behavior or undesired behavior sometimes as well. Look from a design perspective to just ask yourself those questions very explicitly. It also helps then maybe with what you're talking about of informing how you set that up and what you measure. So it becomes a little more human and easier to stir rather than just a whole bunch of data on specific icons in a dashboard.
I think that's what with LLMs gets super interesting now, though, that I love for users, for myself as a user as well, is that there's no longer just one path that the user must be forced to follow. I think that's what gets a lot better with LLMs is, whether you're using it in a process calling sense or a very, very agentic sense, as other frameworks do, I think users are now empowered to change the topic, go on a tangent, go in different directions in ways that they never were with prior systems that would have just said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. And that for me is super exciting. The less that an agent assistant, conversational AI, virtual agent, whatever you want to call it, says, I don't understand, the better it is for all of us, in my opinion.
That's also true. But yeah, I mean, for centuries in conversational AI, they talk about, giving customers the freedom to change their minds and doing all those things. And it doesn't matter what they want. Our system can help it. But it's like, also just, there's this laziness almost behind it, right? If you think of it more as a deeper of like, what is this assistant? What is its purpose? How does it relate to the brand? What do I want people to remember and to experience? So that even if they can do all these things, this is the desired behavior. And we would love for them to take this path because we know that's going to have the most impact on their lives and on our brand value as well. So there is sometimes like, they could change their minds. So it's like, yeah, but if you give them a great journey, why would they? So
True.
So there's a little bit of that dance as well. It's almost, that's why it's like being able to camouflage your lack of strategy. That's a lot of times what it's used for, and then it's going to bite you in the butt somewhere down the line as well.
I think maybe for me, what's exciting, what I see, for example, with Rasa, now a user can ask for two things at once, which is something I do when I talk to online. Is, hey, I need my card's broken and I want to order a new one, instead of like, and I think that's nice because now it's just a tick more efficient that way when you do it. But that's true. Ideally with good design, I shouldn't be midway being like, oh, why am I in this user, of course.
How did I end up here? Yeah.
I didn't want to be here. I wanted to be somewhere else. That would be like a fail, I would say, probably from a conversational design perspective, one could imagine.
Yeah, but I mean, having double like, I guess that's the thing. People can share more initially, and we understand their context so much better. Then we would do them such tremendous service by then guiding them in a certain direction rather than putting all this effort. They can say whatever they want, and we understand it, and we truly understand their context and have empathy for that, and we want to help them. Then us helping them is to actually say, this is your solution. You need to go here. This is the desired behavior. You're going to be great on the other side of this journey, and not give them that much freedom to change their mind because their phone might ping, they get lost. It's a fun dance, I guess. So then, if you look at all these people, we talked about data, we talked about metrics, we talked about reviews and quality and design strategy. If you built like your dream team, conversational AI, bank calls you. That's already an interesting assumption. A bank calls you tomorrow. This says, draw us up, get a whiteboard. What's the perfect team? Who's going to be on there? What's your first hire? What do you look for in a strong team member, etc.? Talk us through it.
I think in a POC team, probably for me, one of the most impactful types of users can be a subject matter expert that joins the project and learns how to work, design, and build conversational AI. Because one of the biggest gaps that I see in teams is that you have a bunch of subject matter experts which know how things work and the processes that are necessary to serve customers, and they just have to drop documents or kind of try and pass it on to developers who then have to go and figure it out. And I think designers are also a big piece of this as well, is orchestrating help. And I think having a designer in the team as well is a huge piece because it sets the whole team up for structured success later on. And I think, also having a designer that's been in a conversational AI project before, massively helpful. So having a little bit of experience from, let's say, career conversational AI practitioners, designers, maybe a PM that's done a conversational AI project before, super useful. And then also the subject matter expertise, super powerful, I think, to kind of bring those two together so that you have some experience, but then a load of experience in the actual, the customer problem itself. And of course, developers. I work at Rasa. We love developers. We've got all first. I think that's also, for me, a project, a conversational AI system needs to be able to solve problems in chat. And without integrations, you're not going to get anywhere. So I think that's where I also see kind of like the technical expertise, testing expertise coming into the project as well.
How do you, one of the things now, so conversation design used to be like, oh, we craft the dialogues, it was like this poetic thing. And now if you look at a POC especially, it's often like, that's an afterthought, right? Where we're kind of looking at like, the design it's not that, it's just like, how do we want the system to speak? And then it basically starts including all of these things, right? It's almost like the experience owner of the whole project. What do you see at enterprises currently? If like, how do you at Rasa try to advocate maybe, or see that role? Because I think it's, the connotation of conversation design people think, oh, that's the person writing the dialogue. Oh, let's first get this thing to work. It's like, no, what is this thing? That's the question of a conversation designer, we would argue.
Yeah. And I think like combine, like, I think you need a really good PM who can like understand very clearly the directive from the people that have all the money and what they want to accomplish. Help them also understand what makes the most sense to accomplish. I think that's also super important, because sometimes the person with the wallet doesn't always understand exactly the biggest problem that the people serving the customers do. And the PM is the bridger of this gap between the two. And then I think partnered with a good designer, right? They can start to ground this PM in what's possible for this, kind of map out at a high level the different domains that you want to cover. PM thinking strategically, okay, do I want to run this in sprints? How do I want to, build the process around all of these things? While we have someone thinking about high level content areas we can approach, what makes the most impact with the least amount of effort, what makes, low impact with high effort, mapping that out. I think a designer is super useful there. Is that what you're also seeing in projects, or where's the gap that you're seeing the most?
I mean, so some companies are really like, okay, we need to figure out, I guess sometimes it's innovation engineering led. And then, it just starts from building stuff. And that's particularly now the LLM stuff, which makes sense. You also know that, down the line, people are going to see more of that experience. But I think that the designer used to be just a seat in the team, where now I think as things get bigger, it just almost leads, as you were talking, I was like, conversational experience owner. Is that what you should call people? Because I think it becomes important to sort of say, like, no, this is actually, by doing this well, you're going to save a lot of money and have much happier customers. So how do we elevate that role? And it seems almost as sometimes the title is hurting a little bit of what it's doing. So I guess we can't call it, but then it's, I guess, CXO, we can't call it that because that's a higher title, conversational experience owner. We'll come up with conversational experience managers. Yeah, we got to come up with something.
Yeah, because I think it's also important that conversational designers have a way to advance their career further. You know what I mean? Sometimes it feels like, you're like senior, then you're lead, and then what? What comes after that? Yeah. You have years of practitioner experience. You probably know how to build some things. You know different interfaces. I mean, there's lots of space to grow, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, and a lot of people would reach out, when these Gen AI stuff happens, like, what's happening to my career? Do I still have a job? What's going on? What do I need to do? It's like, no, your role is like, it's more important. Yeah. Like the more risk there is, the more need for control. And in a way, what you're doing is you're delivering control over the experience, over outcomes. So you're almost like, it's risk mitigation, it's customer experience. And the more risk these teams bring, the more you need it. So it's more about, how do we want this thing to speak? And that means it's like, what is it? Defining what it is. What is its purpose? Well, who are our customers? And those are very big, important questions that are the conversation designer's role. But sometimes they're like, yeah, it's a UX person. Like, we'll bring them in later when we get this whole thing working. So that's it. It comes back to what you're saying. What we started a conversation with is, how do you develop culture in an organization so that people with the wallets know what's important and what they should prioritize and where they might be wasting some money and how they might want to reallocate some of their budgets to create better outcomes. As we talk about that, and we're wrapping up here, we're coming to the end. It's like, what's maybe then a belief that you had about conversational AI that has changed recently in all this new paradigm?
Yeah. I think for me, the most interesting thing that I experienced is right at the beginning, let's say circa ChatGPT 3, right? When that happened, right? There was I noticed a split between customers. Some were thinking, oh my gosh, we can never have this in production. We will never use an LLM. Impossible. And then others who said, drop everything, run. Let's immediate, like, ragbot everything, agentic, massive teams of developers patching together guardrails around this kind of nebulous thing, right? So two different things. And I think with the Rasa side, we got a lot of people who are kind of approaching this conservatively. And I think that's also how our approach kind of was born, is this hybrid, how can we help these teams that want to use LLMs, but want to do it in a way that's going to work in a highly regulated industry. So that's kind of how our approach was born. And I think this also shaped a little bit my thinking about LLMs and where they can be used. And so initially, especially after seeing all these things online, bot gives away free airplane flight, et cetera, I was thinking also like, wow, we really need to be conservative here. But as time goes on, I'm also starting to see really conservative teams see the value of LLMs in their project, and me as well, seeing the value of LLMs and thinking, okay, wait, there's a bunch of conversation types that I've never been able to serve before. And I'm going to call this cluster of conversations exploratory conversations, appointment booking being one of them. Another one being, let's say a consulting type of conversation where conversation doesn't happen in a process. And I think this is kind of a whole space of conversation types that I'm super interested in right now, and interested in finding out how we can use language models to serve them safely. Because I think, you can't map out a recommendation for the next best fall winter coat. That conversation that you're going to have with a customer and a retail assistant could go in many different directions, almost not worth mapping it all out. Where can an agent or a language model help us with that? And that's where I think I'm trying to, my mind is slowly being opened in that direction of thinking like, ooh, actually agents, language models can be really good for kind of helping with these lower risk, but more exploratory type of conversations.
Yeah, so it's adding just scope that otherwise would never have been interesting to us at all to explore, because it's not, so it's a lot of brand stuff almost as well, and building relationships and reputation. So is if you then look strategically, what are you going to be focused on the next 6 months? Is it that specifically that you're exploring, or is there other things that's 6 months feels like a long
Yeah,
time in AI.
I'm not sure. 3 months. No. I think there's definitely a plan. I think for us, one of my favorite parts of my job is I get to work really closely with the product team and kind of bring in like a practitioner's eyeball effectively to new things that we're building. And so I want to keep doing that as much as I can, bringing in insights from customer conversations from our sales team. Keep doing that so that when we start building, we're building things that reflect what teams are asking for and need right now. But I think there's also this kind of like, and this I'm lucky I get to work closely with Alan, who's the co-founder here at Rasa. He's my boss, and I think that's also exciting to work with him, brainstorming. Okay, what is actually let's step beyond what's happening right now and think about what's going to happen in a year from now, and what is that conversational building experience going to look like then? Is it going to be the same as now? And I think that's also an exciting part of my job, is thinking about that. Overall, a lot of education topics around this. I think we're kind of just starting to ramp up, like, okay, now that we have something new, now we got to teach people about how to work with it, how to use it. So that's a big piece of my job.
Yeah, I guess that the overall thing that's just hard is everything's moving so quickly, and then customers want certain things, but it's like, yeah, you might not need that because we anticipate these changes. It's almost like the Henry Ford one. People would have said they want faster horses. I guess that's kind of happening at a quarterly cycle in AI. It's like, oh, we got these problems. Yeah, but do we know? Yeah, so we're kind of a year ahead of you. That's pretty cool. Thank you so much for taking the time. We've come to the end. We've learned a lot, and one thing that I take away is the person with the wallet up there. That's an important person. That person came up quite a bit. We got to talk to that person more, being friends with that person, and show our value more often than I guess that's what a lot of people struggle with. Right? It's like showing more than you feel is necessary, because people don't care. They have other priorities, and just keep telling the story internally about conversational AI. And what's good and bad. Any last thoughts that you would like to share?
No, thanks so much for having me on. Looking forward. I mean, we're always sending as many people as we can to CDI. We think that it's having designers and teams is essential and necessary. And I think it's great that you all are helping designers get better at their craft, and also making sure that there's more of them for our customers to use.
Yeah, that's a great relationship, isn't it? Thank you so much for taking the time, Laura.
Thanks.